There are truths no amount of money can buy, and there are eyes that see what entire fortunes cannot hide. If you believe wisdom can blossom in the most unlikely places, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for daily stories that touch the heart and transform how we see the world. The metropolis awoke under a sky of polished steel, reflected in thousands of mirrored windows that climbed to touch the clouds. Among those glass and concrete skyscrapers, one of the most imposing buildings housed the central courthouse, a modern temple where the law was debated, negotiated, and at times sold to the highest bidder. On that October morning, a crowd gathered on the marble steps. Journalists wielded microphones like swords, cameras flashed incessantly, and nervous murmurs echoed through the halls. The reason for all the commotion had a name and surname: Augusto Valente Ribeiro, the billionaire CEO whose fortune moved entire economies, was on trial. The accusations were grave: fraudulent contracts, bid rigging, sophisticated tax evasion, bribing public officials, an empire built on foundations of paper, sustained by obscure clauses and lawyers who charged by the minute what an average family earned in a year. Inside the courtroom, the air conditioning hummed softly, keeping the temperature cool and controlled. Augusto Valente sat at the defense table, immaculate in his three-piece Italian suit, his grey hair slicked back with imported gel. His light eyes scanned the room with calculated indifference. He showed no fear. After all, fear was for ordinary people. Around him, a wall of lawyers, 5 in total, each an expert in a different area of law. They flipped through stacks of documents, whispered among themselves, adjusted silk ties. Everything about them exuded privilege. The Swiss watches, the designer glasses, the upright posture of someone who had never had to bow before anyone. On the other side of the room, the district attorney adjusted his papers with trembling fingers. He was an older man, with round glasses and a suit jacket worn thin at the elbows. He represented the state, but everyone knew that the state at that moment seemed fragile against so much private power. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The session was opened. As the first arguments were presented, no one paid attention to the back of the room, where the wooden chairs creaked under the weight of anonymous spectators. There, leaning against the wall, sat a girl of about 15. She wore a simple light blue cotton dress, faded at the seams. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. In her arms, a worn notebook, and beside her, an old backpack with colorful thread patches. Her name was Helena. She was there because her mother, Donna Celia, worked as a cleaner at the courthouse. Every afternoon, while her mother cleaned the bathrooms, swept the corridors, and emptied the trash cans where legal secrets were discarded, Helena waited. Sometimes she read, sometimes she observed, sometimes she just listened. Helena didn't have access to private schools, language courses, or well-equipped libraries, but she had something money couldn't buy: insatiable curiosity and infinite time to learn on her own. Her most precious treasure was a book she'd found months ago in a cardboard box destined for the trash. The cover was torn, the pages yellowed, but the title was still legible: Latin Poetry, an annotated anthology. Inside, verses by Ovid, Horace, Catullus. And in the margins, handwritten notes from some forgotten student explaining declensions, conjugations, grammatical structures. Helena devoured that book. She memorized every word, repeated it softly while waiting for her mother. She wrote and rewrote sentences until Latin, a dead language to the world, began to breathe within her. Now, sitting in that courtroom, she heard the lawyers passionately discussing a specific clause in an old contract. The clause was written in Latin, a remnant of 18th century European trade treaties preserved by legal tradition in certain international documents. Augusto Valente's lead attorney stood up, triumphant. His voice was deep, rehearsed. "Your Honor, The clause is clear. Nullum crimen sine poena translata means that no penalty can be transferred without express consent. Therefore, my client cannot be held responsible for the actions of third parties, even if under contract with his company. Legal immunity is guaranteed by the document itself. The prosecutor frowned. He consulted his notes. He mumbled a weak objection. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. Helena, in the back of the room, clutched her notebook to her chest. Her heart was beating fast. She knew. She knew the translation was wrong. She knew the interpretation was distorted. But who was she to speak up? Just the cleaner's daughter. The hearing proceeded like a chess game, played in slow motion. Every move was calculated, every word weighed on a gold scale. Augusto Valente remained impassive, but at the corners of his mouth was the hint of a smile. He knew he was winning. The defense attorneys presented more documents. Graphics projected on digital screens showed financial flows, bank transfers, digital signatures. Everything seemed too technical, too complex, too inaccessible for the average citizen to understand. And that was precisely the point. The prosecutor tried to counter-argue, but his words sounded weak, almost desperate. He didn't have the same resources, nor the same team. It was David against Goliath, but without the slingshot. It was then that the judge, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, interrupted. "Counselors, I request a 15-minute recess. I need to personally review this Latin clause before we proceed." Augusto Valente crossed his arms, satisfied. He knew that no one there mastered archaic legal Latin like his lawyers. The clause was his trump card, an ace hidden for years, waiting for the right moment to be played. During the recess, people got up. Some went out for a smoke, others to the restroom. Many checked their phones. Helena remained seated, her notebook open on her lap. Her hands trembled slightly as she reread the notes she had made upon hearing the clause. Nullum crimen sine poena translata. She repeated it mentally, breaking the phrase into parts. Nullum, no. Crimen, crime. Sine, without. Poena, penalty, punishment. Translata, transferred, moved. But something was wrong. The grammatical construction didn't make sense the way the lawyer had interpreted it. The verb was in the feminine past participle, agreeing with Pina, and the syntactic context indicated not a denial of responsibility, but precisely the opposite, an affirmation that the penalty could not be avoided, could not be transferred to another. In other words, the clause established non-transferable personal responsibility. Helena bit her lip. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe those lawyers, with their degrees and their libraries, knew more than she did. After all, who was she? A self-taught girl, the daughter of a cleaner, who had learned Latin on her own from a book found in the trash. But the doubt remained, pulsing like an open wound. At that moment, Mrs. Celia entered the room through the side door, pushing a cleaning cart. She wore a navy blue uniform, rubber gloves, her hair tied up in a scarf. Her face was tired, but her eyes lit up when she saw her daughter. Helena gave a subtle nod. Her mother smiled, but then returned to her work, picking up crumpled papers from the trash cans, wiping coffee stains from the lawyers' desks. No one looked at Mrs. Celia. She was invisible, just like Helena. The session resumed. The judge returned, still with an uncertain expression. He requested that the lawyers present further clarification on the clause. A technical debate then began, full of Latin quotes, references to ancient treaties, mentions of jurists dead for centuries. Helena listened with growing attention, and the more she heard, the more certain she became. They were wrong, all of them. The lead attorney gestured dramatically. The interpretation is unanimous in European doctrine, Your Honor. The term translata clearly refers to the transfer of guilt, and the particle sine negates that possibility. Therefore, there is no crime imputable to my client. The prosecutor shook his head, confused. But, Your Honor, I'm not sure, the judge sighed. Does anyone here have specific training in legal Latin? Silence. It was then that Helena, almost without realizing it, murmured softly, "He's wrong." Her voice was soft, almost inaudible. But in the silent room, it echoed like a bell. All heads turned. The judge's gaze fell on Helena like an unexpected spotlight. She felt a blush creep up her face, her heart pound. Beside her, Mrs. Celia froze, her hand still holding a trash bag. "I beg your pardon," the judge said, leaning forward. "Who spoke?" Helena swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear, to sink into her chair, to become invisible as she always had been. But something within her, perhaps the glaring injustice she was witnessing, perhaps the silent voice of all the books she had read, would not allow her to remain silent. "I did, sir," she said, rising slowly. Her voice trembled, but the words were firm. "He's wrong. The translation is wrong." A murmur swept through the room. Journalists turned, cameras flashed. Augusto Valente's lawyers exchanged incredulous glances. The CEO himself frowned, showing for the first time something beyond arrogance, irritation. The judge raised his hand, calling for silence. "And who are you, young lady?" Helena hesitated. She looked at her mother, who was pale, her eyes wide. Then she took a deep breath. "My name is Helena. I'm the daughter of Mrs. Zelia, who works here cleaning the courthouse." Stifled laughter. One of the lawyers muttered something to his colleague. Augusto Valente rolled his eyes, but the judge did not laugh. He studied Helena carefully, noting the worn notebook in her hands, her humble but determined posture. "And what makes you think the translation is incorrect?" Helena opened her notebook, searching for her notes. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. "The clause says, 'Nullum crimen sine poena translata,' sir." The lawyer translated it as, "no crime without a transferred penalty," suggesting that responsibility can be avoided. But that doesn't make grammatical sense. The lead attorney stood up, indignant. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This child has no qualifications whatsoever to—" "Let her finish," the judge cut in with surprising firmness. Helena took a deep breath and continued. "The participle translata is in the feminine singular, agreeing with poena, not with crimen. This means the focus of the sentence is not on the crime, but on the penalty. And the use of sign here is not denying the transfer of guilt, but affirming that no crime exists without the penalty falling upon someone, specifically upon the direct responsible party." Absolute silence. "In other words," Helena continued, gaining confidence, "the clause establishes non-transferable personal responsibility. It does not protect the accused. It condemns him." The prosecutor's eyes widened. The judge leaned even further forward. Augusto Valente clenched his fists. "That's ridiculous," the lawyer exploded. "Where did you get such an absurd interpretation from?" Helena held up the worn book she always carried. The cover was torn, the pages stained with coffee and mended with tape. From here, Poesia Latina, Antologia Commentada. I found it in the trash a few months ago. It has notes explaining declensions, grammatical structures, archaic uses. I taught myself. A journalist in the back of the room began typing furiously on his laptop. Mrs. Celia covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. The judge extended his hand. "May I see this book?" Helena handed over the volume with reverence. The judge flipped through the yellowed pages, read some handwritten notes, examined the pencil markings Helena had made in the margins. Then he looked at the lawyers. "Did anyone here study Latin in college?" Embarrassed silence. "Can anyone technically refute what this young lady has just explained?" More silence. The lead attorney opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Augusto Valente stood up abruptly. "This is a circus, a court of justice being influenced by a cleaner." The judge banged his gavel forcefully. "Mr. Ribeiro, control yourself. And for your information, this young lady is not a cleaner. She may be the only person in this room who truly understands what is written in this document." He turned to Helena. Could you please come forward? Helena walked to the front of the room with slow steps, each one weighing like lead. She felt all eyes on her, curious, skeptical, some admiring, others hostile. As she passed the defense table, she met Augusto Valente's icy gaze. He stared at her as if she were an inconvenient insect. The judge indicated a chair next to his bench. "Sit here. I'll need you to explain in more detail." Helena obeyed. The prosecutor, still stunned, offered her a glass of water. She drank it slowly, trying to calm her nerves. The judge projected the Latin document onto the large screen in the room. The ancient letters, written in elaborate calligraphy, shone under the projector's light. "Show us," he said kindly, word by word. Helena stood up, approached the screen. Her hand, still trembling, pointed to the first word. "Nullum," she began, "means none, but in the context of an absolute negation, not an exception. It's an emphatic term." She pointed to the second word. "Crimen," crime, offense. "Neutral, second declination. It's the subject of the clause," she continued. "Sin, a preposition meaning without, followed by the ablative. Here, it introduces the condition under which the crime is considered." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Poena, penalty, punishment. Feminine first declination. And here's the crucial part. Translata, a perfect passive participle from transfero, agrees in gender and number with poena, not crimen." The judge watched intently. Some reporters were recording. The defense attorney was sweating bullets. "This means," Helena continued, "that the action of transferring refers to the penalty, not the crime. The full phrase isn't saying no crime without the penalty being transferred, as if transfer was a possibility. It's saying no crime exists without the penalty being fixed, or rather, without the penalty falling inevitably." She pointed to a footnote in the original document. "And here, look, there's a reference to the Justinian Code, Book 9. In that Roman legal context, the expression was used to establish direct responsibility, not to allow for exemption. Roman legal tradition asserted that guilt could not be deflected. The guilty party had to answer personally." The prosecutor stood up, energized. "Your Honor, this changes everything. If the clause establishes non-transferable responsibility, then the defendant can't hide behind his subordinates or third-party contractors." The defense attorney tried to interject. But this is just an interpretation. There are other possible readings." Helena turned to him. "Are there?" she asked with a boldness she herself didn't know she possessed. "Then cite one. Cite a single source that grammatically justifies the interpretation you've presented." Silence. "Because I can cite," Helena said, turning back to the judge. "Ovid, Metamorphoses, Book Y, Poena mane culpa perit. The penalty remains, the guilt perishes. Horace, Odes, Book 3, Poena clamat ad caelum. The penalty cries out to the heavens. In all cases, poena is treated as inevitable, not something that can be manipulated or transferred." She paused, looking directly at Augusto Valente. This clause wasn't written to protect the powerful. It was written to prevent them from escaping justice. The room erupted in murmurs. Journalists scrambled out, making calls. TV cameras broadcast live. On social media, the story was already starting to go viral. Janitor's daughter debunks billionaire in court. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When silence finally returned, he addressed the defense attorneys. "Gentlemen, I request that you present, by the end of the day, a grounded technical counter-argument. If you cannot, I will be compelled to accept the interpretation presented by this young woman." Augusto Valente stood up, his face red with anger. "This is a farce. A court cannot base its decision on the word of a Brazilian citizen," the judge interrupted, his voice like steel, "who has demonstrated more knowledge and intellectual honesty than your entire legal team." He banged the gavel. "Session suspended." We resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The news spread like wildfire. Before sunset, Helena's story was in every newspaper, website, and social media platform. 15-year-old girl dethrones billionaire with Latin knowledge. Janitor's daughter humiliates elites in court. Social justice, when knowledge comes from unexpected places. Donna Celia was swarmed by dozens of reporters as she left the courthouse. She, who had always been invisible, was now being photographed, filmed, interviewed. With tears in her eyes and a choked voice, she simply said, "My daughter was always smart. I just never had the money to pay for a good school." But she never stopped learning. That night, Helena couldn't sleep. She lay on the narrow bed in the two-room apartment she shared with her mother, staring at the cracked ceiling, still processing everything that had happened. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt tired and scared and strangely sad, because she knew that when the dust settled, when the spotlights faded, she would still be the poor girl, the janitor's daughter, the one without a diploma, an important surname, or a guaranteed future. But for one night, just one night, she had been seen. The next day, the courthouse was packed. Security had to control the crowd outside. Inside, every seat was occupied. Helena and Donna Celia arrived early, entering through the back door to avoid the press. When the judge entered, silence fell immediately. "Good morning. Before we proceed, I would like to inform you that I consulted throughout the night 3 specialists in legal Latin from federal universities. All independently confirmed the interpretation presented yesterday by Ms. Helena." A collective sigh swept through the room. The judge continued, "Therefore, for the purposes of this trial, the clause nullum crimen sine poena translata will be interpreted as establishing the defendant's non-transferable personal responsibility for the crimes imputed to him." Augusto Valente closed his eyes. For the first time, his face showed something beyond arrogance, defeat. The prosecutor, energized, then presented the entire chain of evidence that had previously seemed insufficient, but which now, without the protection of the misinterpreted clause, became irrefutable. Contracts personally signed by Valente, emails with direct orders, bank transfers authorized by him. There was nowhere left to run. At the end of the day, the judge delivered the sentence. Augusto Valente Ribeiro, for the crimes of contractual fraud, active corruption and tax evasion, I sentence you to 12 years of imprisonment in a maximum security facility, in addition to the confiscation of assets totaling 300 million reais, to be reverted to the public treasury. The gavel fell. The empire had crumbled. 3 months later, on a warm January afternoon, Helena was sitting in her usual chair in the back of the courtroom, waiting for her mother to finish her shift. But this time, something was different. In her lap, instead of the old tape-mended Latin poetry book, was a new one, with a hardcover, crisp white pages that smelled wonderful. An anonymous gift sent by mail with a simple note, "For those who see what others do not." Donna Celia had been promoted. She was now the supervisor of the cleaning crew, with a better salary and more humane hours. Helena, meanwhile, had landed a full scholarship to a prestigious private school, along with invitations to speak, interviews, and even a mentorship program with university professors. But that wasn't the most important part. What truly mattered was what happened with the old book, the one found in the trash, its pages yellowed and filled with handwritten notes. Helena donated it to the public library in her neighborhood with a small bronze plaque beside it. This book was found in the trash and changed the story of a girl, her mother, and an entire country. May we never underestimate the power of knowledge, nor scorn the places from which it can spring. The library, once nearly empty, began to draw visitors, children, teenagers, adults. Everyone wanted to see the book. Everyone wanted to know the story. And Helena, sitting there in the courthouse, flipping through her new book, smiled, because she finally understood the true lesson Latin had taught her, that words have power, that truth is stronger than money, and that dignity doesn't reside in surnames or fortunes, but in the courage of those who dare to see beyond appearances. Mrs. Salia finished her shift and came to pick up her daughter. The two walked together through the clean corridors of the courthouse, passing by the rooms where justice, imperfect but possible, was still decided every day. And when they stepped out onto the street, under the orange sky of dusk, Helena looked back one last time. The glass courthouse reflected the entire city, but now, in that reflection, she could also see herself. No longer invisible, no longer silent, just Helena, the girl who read Latin, the janitor's daughter. The one who changed everything. What did you think of this story? Did it make you reflect? Leave a comment below telling us what you felt. And if you want to continue receiving inspiring stories like this every day, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Because the best stories are those that remind us, no one is too small to make a difference.